Inside the Huddle is sponsored by Ohio Production Paint and Assembly Corporation. For your industrial painting needs, call OPAC at 419-582-2761 or visit them at 18 East Main Street in Osgood.
Hey readers and followers, this is Jake Dowling from the Evening Leader with Seth Kinker from the Minster Community Post. We're in week 5 of our Inside the Huddle preview, and this keeps on getting a little bit further along. The weather's starting to change a little bit to that fall season, so we're right in the middle of our football season, so it's pretty exciting. So this week St. Mary's will play Shawnee. They'll be traveling up to Shawnee Township. Minster will be playing Marion Local, state winner from last year, and then another state winner, and Anna will be playing New Bremen. So what's St. Mary's, or what's Minster and Marion Local look like this week?
Yeah, so kind of first we'll look back at their last week's matchup. First for Minster, they picked up their first win. They're now 1-3. They beat Delphos 10-7 on a walk-off field goal from Brian Falk, their kicker, to earn their first win. And then now they have Marion Local, like you mentioned, this week. But first, kind of looking back at Delphos, they outgained them 343 yards to 243. I mean, the last play was big. The 2-minute drive, they went 11 plays for 72 yards for the win to set up that game-winning kick from Brian Falk. Austin Wellman on the ground, he had 113 yards. Connor Albers added another 71. Through the air, Johnny Nixon's been getting more consistent, their quarterback. He went 15 for 21 for 114 yards and a touchdown through the air. Phil Traska caught that pass for them. And wide receiver-wise, it's kind of been, they've had multiple guys catching multiple passes a week. And head coach Garen Stokes said they haven't had any explosive plays in their pass game yet, which is something they're looking for. But he says it's good. Those guys are working hard, and it's good to see kind of, I mean, you'd like to have a main target, but at the same time, having multiple guys contribute makes it harder for them to kind of key in on any guys. So offense is stoked about getting those 11 guys on the same page. You're starting to see more consistency from the running backs getting more yards. That means more continuity on the offensive line. We talked in the past about kind of the need to just get 11 guys on the same page and blocking and just putting a hat on a hat and blocking each other. And Stokes said he's starting to see a little bit of that. And there's obviously still room for improvement, but we've been talking about kind of improvements week to week, and then we're kind of seeing some small things start to take shape for this really young team. Defensively, I got a quote here from Stokes. He said, "We played harder, we stopped the run, and we lined up correctly, which is good. Our defense is slowly coming together. Guys are getting their feet wet and reps underneath them. We're starting to see 11 guys work together and understanding their responsibilities and doing their job." And that's kind of just been a central theme for him since I've talked to him as we've gone week to week, is just getting 11 guys on the same page. And it's been something he's mentioned more and more each week, so I think that he's starting to see that. The coaching staff is starting to see that on film. They still need to reduce turnovers, which is something they're doing consistently, unfortunately for them. And at the same, and again, like I mentioned earlier, is create more explosive plays. And lastly, kind of looking ahead to Marion Local this week, you know, it's hard to get anything out of Stokes with the focus on kind of them and improving their side of the ball. But I just asked him, I said, give me something when you look at kind of preparing for a typical Marion Local team. And he said, quote, "It's like 6th graders playing against 5th graders. We're always excited to play Marion Local. We wish we could play them all the time because they expose your weaknesses and force you to fix things. We're always excited about that. We're going to fight, compete, and try and execute at a higher percentage." So for them, it's kind of just about, again, focusing on them while still trying to learn from a talented team that, again, is looking to kind of prove that they've got what it takes to get back to the top in Marion Local, and kind of shifting gears to Marion Local. I mean, they stayed at 4-0. They beat St. Henry 28-0 last Friday. I mean, it's been a consistent team for this team. Slow starts and then kind of getting it together in the second half. And I mean, the defensive looking from the defensive aspect, their first shot out of the season, not allowing St. Henry to score, and they keep getting better. We've talked about it before with Coach Tim Goodwin. He said, you know, we've got some young guys in starting experience spots this year, and there's going to be growing pains. And now he said, I think we've got everybody on our defense where we want them to be. So now that we have guys knowing what positions they're in, now it's kind of just about playing faster and getting those continued reps. So he said he did see a little bit of progress in their first shutout this week. With those slow starts, he says, like, I said, you know, I'm not going to keep beating the horse. I know you guys are trying to work on it consistently, but like it has to be near your focus as we get into the postseason, because if a bad start can change the course of the game, and of course in the playoffs, that one game and you're out. So I said, what is it? What needs to change? I mean, we talked about execution before, and he says a lot of it he keyed on was just simply it being good. It's been the MAC. It's a strong conference, and he said we haven't even been playing necessarily the worst teams either. We're getting the best looks from teams. We're getting some tough teams. So he said those slow starts are a concern as we get there, but he says he's confident that this team, although they haven't shown it yet, that they can have a good start. So he's kind of looking forward to that, kind of looking later in the season to hopefully get off on a good footing to the start of the game and really put 4 quarters together. He says, one of the things when we were previewing the team last week, he said Minster, their record is deceiving. They're 1-3, but I kind of touched on that this week when I talked to him on the phone previewing the game this Friday, and I said, what do you mean by that? Minster's record is deceiving. He said they're going to play extremely hard. The bottom line is Garen Stokes is a great coach because he gets his team to play extremely hard. It's not complicated. They play extremely hard, sound, and they're not going to give you anything. It's a tough matchup for us. He said it just is, just with their play style versus theirs. So for me, the last thing that he kind of mentioned was kind of the similarities between Minster, St. Henry, and New Bremen, which are 2 games that they've won, but at the same time, when Goodwin looked back on the film, those were kind of 3 teams that were very similar and 2 teams that Mary Loca kind of struggled with. They didn't put a full game together, so he said he expects kind of a tough contest looking up. And then that kind of does it for that first matchup. What are we seeing with St. Mary's this week?
Yeah, so St. Mary's will be on the road against Shawnee Township. It's their 2nd straight road game of the season, and pretty much what I thought I would look into is the state of the Rough Riders through 4 games this year compared to 4 games last year. Obviously, last week when they played Van Wert, they lost 34-28, and that was a track meet, which I kind of expected it to be. And Van Wert's got the best pass offense. St. Mary's had the best rush offense in the Western Buckeye League. And Owen Treese, their quarterback, just went off on St. Mary's, had 362 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. And a lot of them were the variety of the catch and run, the really big plays, and just a lack of coverage on the back end of the defense. So obviously the defense kind of took a step back. They played Ottawa Glandorf the week before, gave up a little bit more than 200 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. So they took kind of a step back this week. They won't be playing a pass offense like they did against Van Wert. They won't be playing that against Shawnee. Shawnee's one of the worst pass offenses in the league, and actually the worst offenses in the league. They don't really rush the ball very well either, but they have a very good rush defense when St. Mary's has the better rush offense. So that's a kind of a matchup to look forward to, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But kind of looking at St. Mary's 4 games to the 2020 season compared to last year through 4 games through the season, they were both 2-2. They're coming off 2 straight losses this year. They're coming off a win last year against Van Wert at the same time. But going into this Week 5 matchup, the question is, can the offense improve? And in that game against Ottawa Glandorf, Coach Doug Fry didn't really seem like they lost because of the defense, but they lost because they couldn't put 4 quarters together on the offensive side of the ball. It's kind of the flip side against Van Wert. The offense scored points there in that first half. First time they scored points in the first half against Van Wert. So they progressed that way, and they scored 21 offensive points. That's the 2nd most points the offense has scored in a game this year. But defense gives up the amount that they give up, so they kind of took a step back. So in some ways, and they still had a chance to win that game against Van Wert. So in some ways, it wasn't really the offense. It was pretty much the defense just letting guys run free for whatever the reason is. So this week, because they're not playing a passing offense like Van Wert, like they are here against Shawnee, the question is, will the offense continue to improve and make that next step? And that's the question that Fry was kind of asking this week was, we're going to see if the offense is going to be able to make that next step, or did they take that next step against Van Wert? Will that show against Shawnee, against one of the top rushing defenses in the Western Buckeye League? So looking at last year's comparison, in the first half of games in 2019, the Rough Riders scored 46 points. They've only scored 14 this year. But the second half of games last year, they scored 43 points. St. Mary's has scored a lot of points in the second half, 65, and that's not including the 14 points they've scored in overtime. Some more first downs this year, 66 compared to 57. They're actually averaging about 35 yards more this year in games than they were last year. So just to kind of a look at, we're talking about how the offense has struggled and the offense has struggled, but some of their numbers are a little bit better than they were last year, and they're both at 2-2 this year. The one stat that shows the most is the fumbles. They fumbled 9 times this year compared to 5 last year, losing 4 of them. They lost 3 last year at the same time. So that's the one thing the offense is struggling with, is try not to turn the ball over. They turned the ball over twice last week. Had a turnover on downs to pretty much end the game there in that fourth quarter as well. And one of the turnovers was in the red zone. So they've had 2 turnovers in the red zone this year. And speaking of the red zone, Fry said that he likes to see that number in terms of converting those red zone opportunities into points. He likes to see them at 85 to 90%. They're at 68.8%. This year. They've had more opportunities compared to last year. They're 8 of 10 through 4 games in the red zone last year. They're 11 of 16 this year. So they've had more opportunities. They converted, the amount of times from 8 to 11, but their percentage is much lower. So that's a number that they need to work on the offensive side of the ball, and that's something that Fry on the offensive side said that he looks at is the red zones and the amount of turnovers that they have, and they're on the negative side of both of those. You need to improve on the fumbles. You need to improve on the red zone. But the other interesting part is they both have 44 offensive drives this season. 2019 team, the 2020 team, but the 2020 team is actually starting their drives at the 42-yard line, about 7.5 yards better than last year. So it's almost a full first down. So they're in good positions. They're moving the football. They're getting the first downs. They're getting the yards, and that all shows that they can move the football. The thing is, they can't finish. That's something or they're struggling to finish. That's something that Fry talked about. We see that with the red zone being only 68% conversion rate to points. And then obviously with the fumbles, that's something that they need to clean up. If they can clean those 2 things up and get the running game going a little bit more against the number 1 rush defense, tall order to ask, they might be able, if they can take that next step, I think that's where they'll be. Last week, kind of comparing week 3 versus week 4, against Otto Glandorf, they had 326 rushing yards on 63 carries, 3 touchdowns, and 20 points. Against Van Wert, they didn't rush as much. They only rushed 225 yards, but they only carried the ball 49 times, had 2 touchdowns, had 2 turnovers, scored 21 points. So in a way, they've taken that step from OG to Van Wert somewhat inconsistently. So the question will be, can they take it all into the next step against Shawnee? So that'll be the tough wire. One other thing about that offense, though, to kind of help them and maybe making that next step, is that Braden Hemmergarn comes back from his 2-game suspension. He had 6 carries for 59 yards, 9.8 yard average. So having that extra weapon on the offensive side of the ball, I think that'll help get them moving in the right direction there. The defense, they took a step back against Van Wert last week, and the big question is what's wrong with the defense. I think one thing that Fry had said, and Fry had kind of made this point to kind of keep in mind, is got to give credit to the other opposing team. They played 2 of the best offenses in the league in Otto Glandorf and Van Wert last week, and they executed. Everything they did, they executed. And not saying that St. Mary's can't play against teams who can execute, but when your team does that and they play perfect, you have to play perfect as well. Yeah. And when that doesn't happen, you're not going to win games. So they have allowed 564 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, and 61 points in the last 2 games after just allowing 14 points the first 2 games. But you look at the teams. Bath 1-3, Wapakoneta 0-4, Van Wert 4-0, and Otto Glandorf 3-1. So you're playing much better competition. They're executing, and it's putting a strain a little bit on the defense. And that was something that Fry pointed out was too often we look at our teams or look at our players and we not criticize them, but we kind of get on them about what's wrong with our team. He said that the credit has to go to the opposing team and their players. They're executing, and that's kind of what they're running into. And what he said was, we look at the film, we make our adjustments, we make our corrections, and we go into the next week. So the thing is, it's kind of hard for them to focus on those passing offenses because they won't play that again. They won't play those offenses again in the WBL, and probably in the postseason. But we don't know who, because we don't know who they play until that week. So I think for them, pretty much it's just realizing that you have, you're playing good offenses and you make your corrections, you go to the next week. I think the focus, though, is on that offense and making sure that they can make that next step. And so they play Shawnee this week. Shawnee has the best rush defense in the league. They have a 3-1 record, and they have a 3-1 record because they're limiting teams' offense. And so we'll see what happens there. Defense might have a good day too. Braden Hemmelgarn had 2 interceptions and returned 1 for a pick 6. So, if they can force the turnovers on the defense side of the ball, give the offense good field position, they might be able to come through. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So what do you got for New Bremen coming up against Anna?
So New Bremen, they fell to 2-2 last week. They lost to league-leading Coldwater, who's also undefeated, along with Marion Local at 4-0. They lost 24-7, and they face Anna this week, a team, like you said, a defending state champion who's kind of 1-3, but at the same time, they're replacing a lot this year. So offensively, against Coldwater, I mean, they stalled. They had an early success with Mitchell Hayes, quarterback, found Kyle Tankman for a long pass, and after that, they weren't able to get any points on the board. And I talked to head coach Chris Schmidt earlier this week, and he said some of it was their physicality, and some of it was their execution on their end. So it was a little bit of combination of Coldwater coming out and performing, and then a little bit of non-performance offensively wise for the Cardinals. Besides, they were outgained 344 to 199. They gave up 213 yards on the ground. Simic said the defense, the score may not indicate it with that 24-7 final, but he said the defense played well. It was just they were left on the field for too long, and that kind of just allowed Coldwater to kind of get into their groove and do what they do, which is control the tempo. And that's something the Cardinals have done in their 2 wins, and that's something they weren't able to do against Coldwater. If you look at the rush game, I think the last game he accounted for 269 total yards. He 3 total touchdowns. I mean, Schmidt said kind of leading up into the preview, we can't completely stop their playmakers like Kip McKibben, their running back as well. It's kind of about slowing them down. And as you can see by that 269 total yards from Blasting game, who's the quarterback but also the league's leading rusher, he was able to perform. Blasting game was able to kind of do his thing. Defensively for New Bremen, Bird Key, although he wasn't successful on the offensive side of the ball, he did lead the team with 14.5 tackles. The improvements to be made, I got a quote here from Coach Chris Schmidt. I mean, he said, "It's such a weird season. Everything is so compressed. We know we've got these last 2 weeks to get better and then see what happens with the playoffs as far as where we're at and what we're seeded. The attitude these last weeks is to get better and hopefully keep playing our best football once it comes to the playoffs." And that's one of the things he touched on earlier, kind of leading into last week. I said, what kind of major strides has this team made from the first week to now? And he said, I don't think our team has played its best football yet. And after this week, we know there's still improvements to be made. And so that the team's continuing to still to improve, but it's also good knowing that they haven't played their best football yet, knowing that they still have a level still to get to, another level they can get to. And kind of looking at Anna, I mean, we talked about last year, he would watch film on them and they'd be kind of scouting the other opponent to see how they lined up against Anna, and he said it wouldn't even matter because some of the athletes they had Bart Bixler, Riley Huelskamp, it just wasn't even fair. They kind of throw out that film rather than maybe look at how the other team was lining up against them. But with the athletes, he said it was a special just combination of speed, physicality, size, strength, everything that Anna team had last year. So when he was looking at Anna this year, he said, I mean, this game, same thing schematically, but I mean, it's just those younger guys getting reps now. So again, with that team kind of being a little bit younger, the focus goes back to them and kind of getting back to what they do, running the ball and kind of doing what Coldwater did to them to this week, running the ball well and kind of setting the pace and allowing their offense to kind of get into tempo. And after that, everything kind of falls into place after that defensively.
Yeah, so it seems like at this point, everybody's we're not playing our best football yet. But we still have room for improvement.
Yeah.
Obviously, we still have time for that improvement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of where St. Mary's is at right now. I mean, they are continuing to improve, continuing to get that consistency, and now it's just about taking the steps for that improvement. It seems like everybody's kind of in that spot right now in the week 5. So,
yeah.
All right, so that is it for the Inside the Huddle preview for week 5. I am Jake, and he is Seth. Be sure to see our print editions of the Evening Leader. The Inside the Huddle printed edition will be in Thursday's paper, and the Minster Community Post will also have their coverage as well on their website and in the print edition. We'll see you next week.